Good morning. It's nice to be back. Florida was enjoyable, but obviously a little stressful at the same time. I got to see a lot of family, some of which one guy I had not seen in 40 years. Not because we didn't like each other, but we hadn't been in the same area. By the same token, anytime you go to a funeral, even of a believer, it's always challenging. So it's nice to be back here. I don't know if you guys realize this or not, but it was the same week last year, March 1st as a matter of fact, that we started with an elder-led church. It's been 1 year that we've been doing this now. And it's actually been an interesting year. It's worked out in some ways like we expected, in some ways a little different than we expected. And today we're going to make it a little different, but this is an experiment today. So if you don't like it, don't panic. Because what we're going to do today is something different, and this may be a really good idea, or it may end up looking like the last 2 minutes of the Hindenburg. We'll find out. If you're too young to know about the Hindenburg, go yell at your history teacher. You should know about that. Anyway, the point is that what we're going to do today is what I'm going to call an interactive sermon. We're not going to do this every week, so don't panic. But just a change of pace, I thought it might be nice. Where what we're actually going to do is have a message, but you're going to get a chance to participate in this message at the same time. We're going to have some questions and things like that. And again, if you like it or don't like it, either way, please, after we're done or this week, send us an email, talk to us. We're not going to be offended. If you come up to me and say, boy, this is the worst idea you've ever had, I'm not going to be offended. I need the feedback, and we need to talk to Gene, talk to Randy, talk to me. It's okay. So in any event, like I said, today it's going to be a little bit different. And in addition to that, what we're going to do today is we're actually going to be just taking a random, just for fun, a random sampling of a number of things that I call weird things in Genesis. Because there's a number of things in Genesis that if you look closely, you start saying to yourself, okay, what does that really mean? Where did that really come from? And we're going to take a look at that today. The first thing we want to look at is Genesis chapter 2, verses 5 and 6. And I remember a few weeks ago I threatened to get myself a giant print Bible. Well, I actually did that. Now the problem is it's a brand new Bible and I got to use something to hold it open because otherwise it wants to do that on me. Anyway, if we read Genesis 2, 5 and 6, it said, "Now no shrub of the field was yet in the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprouted. For the Lord God had not sent rain upon the earth, and there was no man to cultivate the ground. But a mist used to rise from the earth and water the whole surface of the ground." Have you ever thought about the fact that in Genesis it didn't rain in the beginning at all? That it was actually a mist coming up from the ground, and that, again, we had no rain, and this continued actually until the flood. Now what we're going to see on this is this particular fact actually has several other verses that are going to come that we're going to look at, and you're going to say, that's a little bit different. If we look at Genesis chapter 7, verse 11, what we see related to this area with having no rain, Genesis 7, verse 11 says, Genesis 7, verse 2. My mistake. Good way to start things, even the wrong verse. That was just to keep you on your toes. You shall take... Sorry, I've got the wrong one. It was verse 11. My mistake. "In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 7th month of the 17th day of the month, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened." So when it's talking about the fountains of the deep bursting open, it's actually talking about pieces of the land coming apart, and pieces of the land breaking apart, and water coming out of the ground. Now, one of the important things about this is, if you ever thought about it, we talk about a global flood. Okay, the entire earth being covered. If you take all the water on the earth right now and you spread it out over the earth, you know what you find? You don't begin to cover the mountains. The mountains are sticking up, the land's sticking up. I mean, it's all down in the oceans, right? The fact is, what people don't realize is, if you were to take and smooth out the earth a fair amount, there'd be plenty of water to cover the entire surface of the earth. So in Genesis chapter 7, what he's talking about here is a fundamental change in the geological structure of the earth, with breaking the earth apart. And that's what he's talking about here. And he's talking about a change that actually means that it could have covered the earth completely at one point in time. Have any of you guys ever been up digging in the mountains or anything in Wyoming or any place like that? Aside from you. I know you have. Anybody else? All right, Linda, what do you find when you go into them? And by the way, I may need an assistant. If we can't hear I'm hoping people will yell out. but I'm looking for an assistant. You guys are gone. I was going to pick them as an assistant. That's okay. Either way. Who wants to be my assistant today? Somebody raised their hand. Randy, okay, come on up. You're going to be the mic bearer. There you go. To start with, run it over to Linda. Hope I don't wear you out here. All right, Linda. What did you find in Wyoming when you were a kid digging around in Wyoming in the mountains?
All kinds of sea creatures. There were these little things we used to pick up. We called them squid tails, even though I'm sure that's not what they were. You could pick up stones and see little trilobites all over the place. There was all manner of, oh goodness, coral, you name it. Anything that you'd find in the ocean, you would find on the top of the mountains in Wyoming.
And what kind of elevation was this at?
Oh, several thousand feet.
Probably about 5,000 or so, 3 to 5,000 anyway in Wyoming,
Yeah,
minimum.
I never measured
And
it.
in the mountains, higher than that. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we're talking about thousands of feet in the air finding sea creatures up in the mountains. Does that make any sense whatsoever? Yeah, it does. You're right. If you look at the Bible, it actually does. Right. You got it. It makes sense because the Bible's talking about the earth actually being broken apart. So that's what happened there. Now, in addition to this thing, remember, there was only a mist, not a rain coming down. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 9, verses 13 and 14. Actually, if you want to sit for a minute, you can. I don't want to tire you out. But you hang on to the mic, grab a seat, and we'll run you around. You can sit up here if you want. Oh, well. There goes the mic. No. Genesis 9, 13 and 14. What happened? After the flood, what did God say? I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign for a covenant between me and the earth. Talking about a rainbow. And it shall come about when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow will be seen in the cloud. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever actually, has anybody here actually ever found the end of a rainbow? Okay, I used to think that was a joke you'd find, because I thought the rainbow was an optical illusion, basically, by the refraction of the light. And it is refracting light, okay? But I was amazed because about 15 years ago or so, Linda and I were traveling down Route 83 from Pennsylvania down to Maryland, okay, right down south of York. And just as we crossed into Maryland, we noticed a rainbow. And the rainbow was following us along the side of the road, and it was the end of the rainbow on the ground, which I didn't think was possible. And as we drove just a little more, it actually crossed us. And all of a sudden, the car was filled with yellow light and with different colored lights, but especially the yellow. Again, I didn't think this was actually possible because I thought it was something, I thought the sun had to hit and it can't. No, the rainbow actually does go to the ground. Now, unfortunately, I can tell you this, there was no pot of gold there. If there was, we would have stopped. There was, a bunch of asphalt, but that wasn't worth as much as the gold. The point being, though, is that it really is spectacular to be in a rainbow. Have you ever seen double rainbows? Again, spectacular. Once a triple rainbow. So again, these things can be spectacular. Now, as pretty as they are, what's the big deal? Anybody, what's the big deal about God sending a rainbow after the flood? Anybody got any ideas? Yell out, somebody. Put your hand up, yell out, whatever. He said he would never flood the earth. That's fine. But what's the big deal about a rainbow as a sign? After all, I love rainbows. They're beautiful. But what's the big deal? Huh? Never clouds? What else was there never? Rain. This would have been the first rainbow in all history. So when we think about it, this wasn't just God said, I'm going to put a rainbow out today. This was literally the first rainbow to ever appear on the earth, which makes it a whole different story. So every time you see a rainbow, that's specifically a sign of a promise from God. It's not just something that's done, it's just been going on, now I've renamed it. It was the very first rainbow to ever hit the earth. And that's kind of amazing when you start thinking about that. The other thing to think about is, think about this. Noah built this ark, this giant boat. And there was no rain, and probably weren't any really big bodies of water, because remember, it was all kind of smoothed out more. That took a lot of faith to be building a boat when there's no giant bodies of water. That's a little bit of speculation there. But the idea that there was no rainbows beforehand, that's not speculation. You don't get rainbows if you don't get rain. So that's why God used the rainbow, and that's why it was, obviously. And if I looked up in the rainbow and I'd never seen the sky and saw a rainbow and never seen one before, that would get my attention, definitely. And that was God's idea, to get his attention. Now, let's take a quick look. And some of these things, by the way, we've discussed before a little bit. There's several coming up I guarantee we have never discussed in church, and you probably have not thought about either. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 14. This we've talked about a little bit. But in chapter 1, verse 1, we have, now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field, which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, God has said, you shall not eat from the tree of the garden. Okay? Does this strike anyone as a tad unusual in any way? You got the mic. What do you think? Is that a little unusual?
What was the question?
Does it, with the serpent saying to Eve, talking about the tree, does that sound a little unusual?
Well, sure, a snake's talking.
Right, a snake's talking. As I've said before, if my dog came up to me and we started talking about the weather, it would get my attention, because dogs don't talk. So if the serpent was actually talking, okay, what does that say to you about the possibilities of animals and serpents, etc., at that point in time? Certainly serpents talk, but you're right, maybe all the animals talked. We don't know. Maybe the animals talked, maybe just the serpent talked. Something else you're going to notice here is that it talked about the serpent being crafty. It talked about the serpent was an intelligent animal that was able to hold a conversation with Eve. That's not normal. So there's obviously a fundamental change in the garden and with the animal kingdom at the point in time when the fall occurred. Now, one of the things to think about here, if we go to verse 14, it said, the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you more than all cattle, and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you will go, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. All right. Think about this. What did the serpent look like when it talked to Eve? Yeah, probably standing up. We don't know what the serpent looked like, but we know this. It did not crawl on its belly. So when you think of a serpent or a snake today, don't think of a snake walking up and talking to Eve and slithering up, hi Eve, how you doing? Nothing like that, okay? The point is that instead we're talking about one of the most beautiful animals that God created. I'm speculating here. Please don't go out and say Carleton said this, okay? But as speculation, one thing I've actually wondered about is a lot of myths have their origin in reality. And one of the things I've wondered is, there's an awful lot of myths about unicorns. I wonder if maybe a unicorn was actually the serpent before the fall, and he cursed it and then turned it into a snake and it crawled on its belly. Now, there's no biblical evidence for that, okay? I'm speculating here, but the point of whatever the serpent was, it wasn't crawling on its belly and it wasn't ugly. It was smart, it was crafty, and it was able to talk. And the other thing we look at here, let me ask you a question. Let's say that somebody took a brick and threw a brick and hit you in the head with the brick, okay? And God was angry about that. Would God curse the brick? Why? He knows, yeah. It's inanimate. It's stupid. Exactly. Just like a dog. If a dog today goes and bites somebody, you may have to do something to the dog. But you don't go, oh, that dog had this thought process and was going to... No, it's not that intelligent, okay? And dogs are intelligent. We got intelligent dogs. But the point is, if you knew our dogs, you'd understand what I mean. The point being is that the fact that God cursed the serpent tells me, and the fact that God called it crafty, tells me that at that point in time, the serpent was an intelligent being of some kind that was walking around. It wasn't, as I said, a dumb snake slithering around on the ground or something like that. So again, we see a fundamental change. And if we don't study the Bible closely, not only that, one of the reasons we're doing this today, a lot of times we make assumptions about what the Bible says. And the reason we make assumptions is we're not looking closely. We've got our own ideas and overlaying our own thoughts onto it. The fact is, how many of you have actually thought about the fact that the serpent was beautiful beforehand and able to carry on a conversation, and there was something abnormal about this? Again, if an animal comes up and talks to you, please let me know. I'd like to get a video of that. I'll get that thing on YouTube. We'll get some hits. We will make some real money with that thing, I tell you. All right. Yes, question?
Well, it's not a question,
Go
it's
ahead.
a comment.
Yeah?
A vast majority of the skeletons of snakes have a pelvic bone, which indicates that they used to be able to walk.
I didn't know that. That's actually fascinating. All right, everybody look that up. Pelvic bones in... I'm serious. Go Google that when you get home. Not a commercial for Google.
It's on my iPad.
Okay, seriously. Look at Randy's iPad afterwards. I do find that fascinating. Seriously. This is good. I get to learn things here today, too. So yeah, if they have a pelvic bone, you're right. There's no reason for a snake to have a pelvic bone unless it walked at one point in time. Thank you. You're going to be my expert assistant now, not just the microphone. You've been promoted. All right. Let's turn to Genesis 3:16. You're right there already. Part of the, and this actually isn't cursing here with the woman, but part of the punishment that's going to happen is, to the woman he said, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children. Your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. Now let me ask you a question. What would you say if I said to you, this week I'm going to increase the number of murders that I commit? First off, I would not be speaking here next week, I'm sure. And you'd probably be calling the police. But what would that imply to you if I said I'm going to commit more murders this week than I did last week? Right. That I was previously a murderer. That obviously, I'm not going to say that if this is going to be my first murder. And I'm not going to kill anybody, okay? But if it was going to be my first murder this week, I would not say, no, please don't be afraid. I see people terrified in the audience. No. It would say to you that I have obviously murdered before if I'm going to increase the number of murders, okay? Now here's the weird thing. When I go back and look at this, I said to myself, probably if I go back to the Hebrew, I'll find out this means to start or begin. No, it really doesn't. Greatly multiply, increase, it's a good translation. I am not swearing this, okay? And again, this is speculation to say, hey, we need to look at the text and what it says. But the implication might be that Eve had other children. Did you ever think, before the fall, did you ever think of that? The Bible is silent on that issue. We don't know. Now, we do know that if she had other children, something had to happen that's different with them than everything else. But the fact is, if he's going to increase the pain in childbearing, that's a strange way, and maybe it's just a strange way to put it, and all God meant was just, it was a strange way to put it, but it's certainly something that we can dig into. Now, it's something we will never come to an answer for, okay? I don't mean to say, again, don't go out and say, Eve had other kids, we know. No, we don't know that for sure. But sometimes it's easy to say, hey, we think we know what we're talking about, and we don't know what we're talking about necessarily.
Carleton?
Yeah. Go ahead.
It says, the woman he said, I will make your pains in childbearing. So you're saying the translation says increase?
It really says increase or greatly multiply from what I found. Now again,
It says like it's
yeah. Well, the point is, that makes it very easy to handle. You don't have to think about these things. If you look at the King James, if you look at the NASB, I was just reading from the New American Standard here, I will greatly multiply your pain. King James is increased. That seems to be a better translation. Sometimes translations will kind of make things a little easier to swallow. And honestly, if there's no other kids, there's a lot less theological implications to consider. So again, I'm not swearing there was. Yeah, Linda.
It actually also says, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's two ways to translate this. Either one is acceptable. We're not sure. It could be, I will greatly increase your pain in childbearing, or I will greatly increase your pain and increase your childbearing. Okay? I've seen it debated both ways. Either way, whether you're increasing childbearing or increasing pain in childbearing, the implication is, hey, wait a second, what happened here? And doing it that way makes sense because there wouldn't have been pain beforehand. It would just been increasing the amount of kids you're producing. Which again brings up some strange theological implications, but they can be dealt with, don't worry. Now, along with that, let's turn to Genesis 3:24, still in Genesis 3. So he drove the man out, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he stationed the cherubim, the flaming sword, which turned every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. Okay, so first off, cherubim is the plural for cherub, meaning that he put a bunch of cherubs there, not one. And the other thing too is, does this say that we always see the pictures of a cherub standing there with a flaming sword guarding the garden? Is that what it says? What's it say? And he put a flaming sword there and the cherubim. I don't know what that means, but that flaming sword may have been something God set up that just defends it. Yeah.
So God did not destroy the garden. Where is the garden?
Right. Good question. See, I'm glad you asked that because that's the next question. What happened to the garden? But in addition to that, why didn't he destroy the garden? I actually believe the garden was probably destroyed in the flood. Okay? But here's the point. We don't know for sure. It may have been buried, may have been destroyed, may have been who knows what God did. But think about this. Why didn't he destroy the garden immediately? There's no need for it anymore, right? No need to put the guards there, no need to put the flaming sword there or anything else. And why didn't he get rid of the tree of life? Because the tree of life is going to end up in the new heaven and new earth, the new Jerusalem. It doesn't stay in the garden. Why didn't he get rid of the tree of life at the time he kicked him out of the garden? Any ideas? Maybe. Any other ideas? Maybe it was in use. Maybe somebody lived in the garden. Maybe somebody was still eating from the tree of life after Adam and Eve got kicked out. If that happens to be true, any ideas who it might be? Eve's children, exactly, Adam and Eve's children. So again, I'm not insisting Eve had children, okay, beforehand, but there is a possibility here that she had children. Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden. Since we are all descended from Adam and Eve, we all have a sin nature. But these children may have still been in the garden for a bit, we don't know how many, and may have been still eating from the tree of life. Now, in addition to that, let me take a diversion here, okay? The diversion is that I want to read this verse again to you, but I want to read it to you from an original 1611 King James, and it's a reprint of the original 1611 King James Bible. And if you've seen the original 1611 King James Bible, it looks like the book of Genesis. It's actually the way they wrote it. It's Genesis, trust me. But the original says in that verse, and it says in the same thing in the later King James, so he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. Did you notice that word cherubims? What's the plural of cherub? Cherubim. What's the plural of cherubims? Doesn't even make sense, does it? No, you can't have cherubims because you can't pluralize a plural. Now, the reason I bring that up is very simple. The reason I bring that up is because there are some people that you are going to hit in this planet who actually believe that the King James Bible is the original King James is the only inspired Bible in the English language. Believe it or not, there was a man named Ruckman a while back, many years ago, who not only believed the King James Bible, and they won't even call it that, they call it the authorized version, but that the authorized version is the only acceptable version of the Bible. And Linda showed me a book that she has, and in that book he has a chapter called Correcting the Greek with the English. And he's dead serious about it, that the Greek was not the inspired version of the New Testament, that the King James Bible is the inspired Bible. As a matter of fact, it's still there as a church, but they've changed their sign. When I was growing up in this area, if you went down 450 past Crofton, past Bowie, and got down there and past 424, you know what you found down on the right side of the road, sitting down on a little hill? There was a medium-sized church there, and a big sign out front. The sign never did tell the name of the church. The only thing the sign said is, 1611 King James only. My best friend in high school didn't want to talk to me because I didn't accept the King James. After high school, I didn't accept King James only. Now, the reason I bring this up is because here we have a word that cannot possibly exist, which is an obvious error. There should be no errors in anything that's inspired. That's why I believe the original Greek manuscripts and Hebrew manuscripts are without error in the original Bible. But the King James right there has an error in this book because you can't pluralize a plural. So if someone wants to tell you that the King James Bible is the only Bible, take them to Genesis 3:24 and show them cherubims, because cherubims do not exist, trust me. Cherubim does, cherub does, but not cherubims. I know that was a little bit of a diversion. Now let's move on to Genesis chapter 6. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Before I go on there, think about this. What did it say about the sons and daughters? How did it identify them? Anybody? Sons of who? Sons of God. Daughters of who? Men. Isn't that kind of strange? Isn't that kind of weird? Now, one way that people have explained this is they've said these were angels who came down, and the angels actually had sex with the women, and after that they had children that were born, and that's what it's talking about. Let me read to you very quickly, if I can get to it, Matthew 22:30, talking about heaven. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. I believe what that's saying is angels are sexless. Angels do not have sex, which would make sense for an angelic spiritual being who can take on human form, but I don't believe could reproduce. Not only that, the evidence for them being angels is very scant. And if you look, I've seen papers, doctoral papers written for why it absolutely had to be angels, and other ones saying why it absolutely could not possibly be angels. I don't know the truth here. None of us ever will know the truth. Their children are called the Nephilim. And it said, Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And these evidently have turned into very evil people. The point being that I will bring out as a possibility, not to say this is true, but if Eve had children in the Garden of Eden and they remained there, what if they looked out and saw the women and left the Garden of Eden and they were the people that bred and had the Nephilim? Not saying it's true, I'm just saying we don't know the truth here. I'm bringing out other possibilities and saying, study the Bible. Yeah, Mark?
So, back to the tree of life. So God didn't put prohibition on eating from the tree of life, just from the tree of knowledge of good and evil?
Well, tree of life they could eat from. And the idea was they keep eating, they keep living. Tree of knowledge of good and evil was the one, don't eat from that thing. Exactly. You got it. That work? Okay.
So prior to Eve had children before the fall,
They would have stayed sinless. They would not have inherited Adam's sin nature if it happened before the fall. After the fall, anyone who was born, we all have sin nature. Absolutely. Yeah, Randy.
But would they have been considered sons of God?
Good question. Honestly, we don't know what that term sons of God means. And I'm just bringing this up as a possibility, because angels really wouldn't be considered sons of God either. Remember, angels are created individually, and angels are never referred to as sons of God. They're messengers. So my point is this: nothing really fits the text. We're speculating. And here's something else. It doesn't in any way take away from the validity of the Bible. Because the fact is, the Bible is still valid. God didn't have to tell us. You know something? We don't have to have any knowledge of who the Nephilim are in order to be saved or know how to follow Jesus Christ. But it's interesting to study, and God put it there, and because it's there, I'm going to study it. So that's what we're looking at. In addition to that, actually, let's move on here. Genesis 6:19. Genesis 6:19, we've talked about this before, says, And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every kind into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Genesis 7:2 says, You shall take with you of every clean animal by sevens. And turn 2 pages, by sevens and your wife. That makes no sense. By sevens, a male and his female, and of the animals that are not clean, 2, a male and his female. Didn't God contradict himself there? Take 2 of every kind, then he's saying take 14 of the clean and 2 of the unclean? Isn't that a contradiction? Doesn't that prove the Bible's wrong? Shouldn't we just pack it up and all go home? Please, you know the answer is that I'm being sarcastic here. Somebody disagree with me. Okay, no. What do you think might explain this? There's 2 possible answers. Any ideas? Can you take her the mic? Okay, that's why he did it. But as far as do these contradict each other? Number one, it may well be that he's saying in the first verse, take them 2 at a time. And in the second verse, he explains more about here's the specifics. The other thing you have to understand is, many times in Genesis you'll see, when a Hebrew person writes, frequently they'll do summary explanation. We have that in the creation story. We even have it in the book of Revelation. Even though it's written in Greek, it's written by a Hebrew. Okay? The point being is, I think what's happening here is, in chapter 6, he's saying summary, take 2 of every kind. And then in 7, he's saying, now here's the full explanation of it. Now, I heard an answer to the question I haven't brought up yet. Why did he take 14 of the clean? You just nailed it. What was it again? Yell it out. Sacrifice. Because what happens is this: Noah lands the ark door drops open, Noah walks out, sacrifices a lamb. Guess what? You just lost a species. And worse yet, if you look at it, it actually says in Genesis 8:20 that he would sacrifice of every clean beast and every clean fowl. So the first thing Noah would have done is wiped out every clean species. Not a good way to start a new planet, or a new species, or a new living planet. Yeah, Randy.
The original passage, we're talking about taking two every creature.
Yes.
In verse 20, it says, to keep them alive. They shall come to you to keep them alive.
Mm-hmm.
The 14, the sacrificial animals, were coming to be kept alive.
Good point.
They were coming to be sacrificed.
Good point. It could be the fact that, yeah, the two of each were the breeding stock. Just to repeat it if you didn't hear it. The two of each would have been the breeding stock from verse 20 he's talking about. That's very possible. And then the others, instead of coming to him to be kept alive, were coming for sacrifice. Now, I don't think he sacrificed all of them necessarily, but the point is, obviously, you had to have extra animals for sacrifice. Otherwise, it's not good to wipe out species willy-nilly because you just landed the ark. And it just doesn't work well that way. Now, any other questions on that? Yes, Randy.
How did he know what was clean and unclean?
Good point. God had to tell him. Now, we know today it had to do the cloven foot and the chewing of cud, but honestly, that had to be something God told Noah. I don't remember it being in the text before that, but it could be. I don't think it is, but the point is, God obviously, remember, God was speaking to Noah directly at that point in time. So you're right. Otherwise, again, everything in the Bible is true and accurate, but not everything is in the Bible. So God didn't record every conversation. Later on, he specified what's clean and what's not clean. Now, I want to go to Genesis 8, and I'll tell you why. You're going to see something that I never spotted until Linda pointed it out to me. Because this is one, and I'm like, hey, wait a second. I never noticed that. Turn to Genesis 8, verse 11. Now, this is after the flood, and the flood starts to recede. And what happens? It says, the dove came to him. Noah sent a dove out to see what's going on. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abated from the earth. Does anyone see any problems with that? Yeah.
It would have taken a long time for a tree to grow up.
Well, the trees would have been under the water, so they may have still survived. But good point. Obviously, he didn't wait for an olive tree, because I don't know if you know about olive trees. They take generations to mature. So obviously he couldn't have waited for generations. We know the timetable. But good idea there. What else do you think, anything coming to anyone's mind about this olive branch that the bird got?
That they don't grow at high altitude.
Right.
So that would have to be closer to the ground.
Well, sort of. Yeah, I know you're on the right track. Mount Ararat is 16,854 feet high. Do you know what covers Mount Ararat? An ice pack. The entire top of the mountain is ice. That's assuming we know which Ararat was, but the one today is Mount Ararat, 16,854 feet high, followed by an ice pack. Has anybody here ever gone up in the Rockies? Okay, you've been in the Rockies. What do you notice as you get higher and higher, even before the snow? What? I can't hear you.
Grassy.
Grassy? Yeah, kind of. Okay. What about the trees? The timber line and the tree line, exactly. The trees disappear at a certain... You're going up and all of a sudden you got the tree cover, which is the timber line, and then you got the tree line, which is your last tree, basically. And you hit a certain altitude, there's nothing above that. And the Rockies are actually one of the highest tree lines in the world at about 11,000 feet. Most of your tree lines are anywhere from 7,000 to 10,000 feet up. Here we have a mountain 16,000 feet up, so you're exactly on the right track. Now, here's the point. I do believe that olive branch came from the top of Mount Ararat. Anyone have any ideas how that could actually be true along with what we just said? Right. Repeat it. Yell it out. Breaking up in the deeps. Remember, there was a complete geological transformation during the flood. When it broke apart, all of a sudden, Mount Ararat may have gone 10,000 feet up. Other places may have dropped. So the point is, I think you probably did have olive trees on the top of what was Mount Ararat, but it may have ended up 10,000 feet higher than it started. In addition to that, we also believe, and I'm not going to go into details on this, most of us believe that there was some kind of a controlled the controlled temperature on the Earth, and that the entire Earth, due to either a water canopy or whatever, was somehow tropical or semi-tropical. So the point being is, trees could have grown in that kind of environment. In addition to that, right along with that, what you'll find interesting. Boy, it's going to be a strange one because it was a year ago today the Elder started, and now I'm going to mention Ohio State. Anyway, you'll understand. Ohio State has an ice core. If you're new to this church, you don't know what I just said. If you've been here for a while, you know exactly why I said it. Ohio State has an ice core lab, and they have the biggest collection of ice cores in the entire world. And I watched a show one time with one of these specialists going on, and you know what they found interesting? 5,200 years ago approximately, something cataclysmic happened, and they don't know what. All over the Earth, you know what all their ice cores showed? Their ice core shows things like you go down to Antarctica. You go back 5,200 years, and guess what? There's remnants of tropical plants. There's lichens. There's all kinds of stuff that shouldn't be growing in Antarctica. And it all tied, what fascinated them was, they were not creationists. They're not trying to explain the flood necessarily. But the point is, it all tied back to the fact that at one point in time, it appears that the entire Earth was an area where you could live in. The point is, something happened. And again, if we look at these verses, the verses give clues to each other. But most of it was just gloss over, oh yeah, he went out and got a bird branch. Bird got a branch, not a bird branch. But anyway, the bird grabbed a branch off a tree. You don't even think twice about what does that mean. What that means is there had to be, whatever it was. I'm not trying to say I can tell you all the science from this or anything else. What I'm saying is something dramatic happened that we may not explain it, but we should be able to say, look, something happened here. Not only that, I'm going to give you a personal view here. It's interesting because when Lynn and I went to Alaska, what we found was interesting. In Skagway in particular, there were these valleys that we were in with a water down below. I was out fishing in it. And you could see, like, a half mile up, it was obviously carved out by glaciers, okay? Well, the question is, where did these glaciers come from? And what I actually believe personally, if you look at the 5,200-year timetable, and not only that, if you look at, for example, the fact that the last glacier disappeared from, it was either Newfoundland or Labrador, one of the two, about the year 1500. I actually believe the reason that the glaciers are disappearing is because I believe the glaciers are still retreating from the flood. And the flood was so overwhelming, as you get more volume, the temperature is going to stay stable. I think these things have been retreating for 5,000 years. Now, I'm not going to stake my life on that or anything else, and I'm not going to go into the details, but from what I've seen, it actually makes a lot of sense. And again, if I'm wrong, okay, I'm wrong. That's not in the Bible, so that's fine. Genesis 9, 2 and 3. Just briefly here. Interesting, if you look, it says... let me see. The fear of you and the terror of you will be on every beast of the earth and on every bird of the sky, with everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea into your hand they are given. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. They weren't eating animals before the flood. They were evidently eating all vegetables and fruits. It was after the flood God said, now you can eat animals, and now you can eat birds. Nothing really unusual here, but just kind of interesting. At least I find it interesting. Next thing, and I'm speeding up a hair here so we can try to get through most of these. Next thing we hit is Genesis 13. In Genesis 13:15, it says, talking about Abraham, for all the land which you see, I will give it to you and to your descendants forever. Anybody think about that one? What's that mean? Any implications? Anybody? What's forever mean? You already know that. Why is this important? Go ahead.
Well, it's forever, the descendants of Abraham are going to inherit that land. They haven't yet, but they're
going to. Forever.
Forever.
And not only that, if we look at what the land is, the land was actually from the Euphrates to the Nile, and covers the land of the Hittites. Well, the Hittites lived north of the areas as well. So it's a big area there, right? Okay. Now, in addition to that, the reason I bring up forever is the fact that where are Christians and saved Jews going to live, or Old Testament saints going to live for eternity? Everybody say heaven, right? Christians are not going to spend eternity in heaven. Non-believers are not going to spend eternity in hell. Oh, what did he just say? You want to explain that? I saw you look. You understand that one, don't you?
New Jerusalem.
New Jerusalem on the earth for believers. Unbelievers, lake of fire. It's even worse than hell. Okay, hell is going to be dumped into the lake of fire in Revelation 20, I believe it is. But for believers, the New Jerusalem, it's going to be a reformed earth. I actually believe when it says forever, it means forever. I think that we and Abraham's descendants are actually going to be living in Jerusalem, in Israel, in this promised land area. That's why it was given to him. So that when he says forever, he means actually forever. He's not talking about something. He's not talking about something which is temporary. Now, if we go to Genesis 18, Genesis 18, interesting here. And the Lord appeared to him, Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. So it was the Lord coming to him. And in verse 4, Abraham says, "Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the trees, and I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves." And it goes on, the Lord is eating and drinking like a man. Now, in addition to that, I want to cross-reference that with Exodus 33:20, which says, "But he said," God speaking, "You cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live." What's the answer? Was it like one of these crime shows where God's sitting there talking to Abraham and he's got a blue dot over his face or something? No. What's the answer here? Any ideas? Any thoughts? Any questions? If not, I'll give you the answer. All right. When it's in Exodus, it's speaking about the Father. No one can see the Father and live. I believe in this case, in Genesis 18, it was Christ making an appearance prior to his coming to earth. And therefore, Christ was able to meet with Abraham without Abraham dying. I don't know about you, but if I throw a dinner party and everyone dies when someone shows up, that's not a good dinner party. That's why I think we've got Christ here and not the Father here. So they were able to he was able to meet with Christ, but he could not meet with the Father, obviously, face to face. And that's why with Moses, God only showed him his back, not his face, because he didn't want him to die. Again, a messenger from God who dies instantly is not a good messenger from God. All right, Genesis 19. When we go to Genesis 19, what we see is we're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. And if I can get the pages of this new Bible open, we'll actually get to Genesis 19. Okay. All right, that didn't help. It still doesn't want to open up here. There better be a Genesis 19 in this new Bible or I'm going to be really, really ticked. There it is. Okay. When we get to Sodom and Gomorrah, what happens? Anybody remembers what happens when the angels show up and Lot takes them into their house? Anybody remember? Go ahead.
The men of the city want to have relationships with them.
Men of the city want to have relations. It says in verse 5, it says, "And they called to Lot and said to him, 'Where are the men who came to see you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may have relations with them.'" Now, some people have actually said this isn't talking about homosexual relations. This is talking about a lack of hospitality. Okay? First off, you really have to twist the text to get that. But secondly, let me read on. What's Lot's response? Lot went out to them at the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Now behold, I have 2 daughters who have not had relations with men. Please let me bring them out to you and do to them whatever you like. Only do nothing to these men inasmuch as they have come under the shelter of my roof." It makes no sense whatsoever to say that if he's not talking about sexual relationships, because he's obviously not talking about hospitality to send his daughters out to meet these guys. Okay? So it makes no sense. It also doesn't make any sense with the book of Jude. Now, the reason I bring this up is not so much to talk about what happened with the angels and the men. The reason I bring this up is because has anybody ever sat down and read this story and said, "Wasn't Lot nuts?" Not only that, have you ever said to yourself, why in the world did God want to save Lot? I mean, to me, I read this story. First thing I want to do is kick Lot's butt. Okay? You know, I'll tell you, I don't think there's any man in here who would say, "Here, take my virgin daughters and do with them what you want, just don't touch these guys." And if you did say that, that's when we're going to have the elders and church council have a meeting with you. Please, don't offer your daughters. The point being is it's nuts. Now, the reason I bring this up is twofold. Number one, why did God spare Lot? Because not only that, I think Lot was pretty darn comfortable in Sodom. I don't see Lot saying, I'm trying to get out of here. And that was the area that Lot chose to go to also. I don't think Lot would have ever left Sodom of his own accord. Why do you think God chose Lot? Anybody? It's okay, yell it out. Right. Yell at Abraham. The agreement with Abraham. He spared Lot because he cared about Abraham, and Lot was his nephew, if I remember correctly. That's why he spared Lot. Now, I'm not saying Lot was the worst guy in the world, but I don't think God was sitting there probably saying, oh, wow, this guy's great. He's offering his daughters to these people. The other reason I bring this up is because sometimes the Bible records things factually and accurately, which are horrible things. I don't think anywhere in this text is the text saying, and it was good that Lot did this. I think Lot was an idiot, at best. I think Lot was, somebody who let me say this, Lot is not somebody that I want to invite over for dinner. But the point is, God did this because of his relationship with Abraham. And not only his relationship with Abraham, but also, if you think about it again, the Bible is factually telling you what happened, it's not endorsing it. Because sometimes we see things and we say, well, gee, David did that, or Lot did that. Well, yeah, David cheated and had a man killed so he could steal his wife. David did a lot of things. Just because a Bible character did something doesn't mean it was a good thing. So I think that's a good example to take away from that. One last thing I'm going to bring up, I'm not going to turn there because we're running short on time, and Linda brought this up to me, was in Genesis chapter 20. Abraham tried to pass off Sarah as his sister. Now that was actually true because she was a partial sister, but she was his wife too. So you don't take your wife and say, yeah, she's my sister, okay? The fact is, he tried to pass her off as his sister because he was afraid of getting killed or afraid of somebody killing him so that Sarah could be taken from him. Sarah was 90 years old. No offense to 90-year-old women, but I have never seen a 90-year-old woman where I said, I got to kill that lady's husband so I can get to her. I don't know what was going on in that case, okay? But Sarah must have been an unusually beautiful woman and an unusually healthy woman at 90 years old. And I do feel people lived longer, don't get me wrong. But I still to this day cannot understand why Abraham had to do that to make sure that he wouldn't be killed so that Sarah would be taken. Just interesting. If you got ideas, I'm open to them. Some people have said because maybe he was worried the king would marry her so that he could have a treaty with him. But if that was true, it wouldn't make any sense for him to kill Abraham. You don't kill the person you want to have a treaty with, so that makes no sense at all. All right. Yeah. Maybe, but I don't really see that as such. I don't think Satan was involved in this. I think there was just something about Sarah that evidently even at 90 years old, people were like, hey, still desirable. I don't know why, I don't understand it or whatever. And again, I'm not criticizing 90-year-old women, so don't get me wrong. It's just that normally that's not the kind of people you say, oh, they're going to go kill the husband and take her for it, or something like that. Any other questions about what we talked about this morning? Yes? Let me get the microphone on you. Yes?
I was just thinking about that thing with the sons of God, if that's what they were in the Garden of Eden, and this verse in Romans came to my mind, which says, nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned according to the likeness of Adam's transgression.
That's interesting. I never noticed that. I'm not sure what it means.
Yeah, I don't know if that implies that they were there. It doesn't matter. If there were people in the garden, it seems to me like they were also cursed because of Adam's.
At a certain point in time, they obviously sinned. If they would have, or been taken straight to heaven, one or the other. But I never noticed that. I put this down so I don't get feedback. It's also interesting because when we do these, and again, I don't know if we'll do this again or not, probably up to you guys more than me. When we do an interactive sermon, it's also interesting because in a sermon, I can control everything you're going to hear and know all the questions beforehand. When it's interactive, you never know what somebody very clever may come up with. So anyway, thank you, appreciate it. But yeah, Randy.
If there were children of Adam and Eve living in the garden that were conceived pre-fall,
Yes.
that would not inherit the sin, would not have the sin nature, the race of those descendants of Adam would have died out with the flood.
Mm-hmm.
So the God still only applies to the post-fall.
Right. The redemption only applies to the post-fall. I would say this, though. Because of the flood, my point is, if there were children of Adam and Eve before the flood, before the fall, okay, they either prior to the flood had to be taken straight to heaven by God because they didn't sin, or they had to have fallen, which might explain the Nephilim. We're not sure. But in any event, that's what I would... Certainly by the time the flood came, it couldn't have been afterwards because God destroyed the entire world because of the flood. Yeah?
Couldn't they be cursed by virtue of being their children, even if they were conceived?
Well, yeah, could they be cursed by virtue of being their children even though it was before the fall? I don't think so because after the fall it was passed down to the children, but I can't say 100%. I agree with you. I don't think they would have been. That's why I think they would have either had to have fallen. Not only that, let's say they were cursed, then why didn't God kick them out of the garden if they were there? And now again, this is all speculation. Again, please don't go around saying, Carleton said they had 7 kids and 4 grandchildren. No, I didn't say that. So, yeah, Linda.
Well, I think that's what the Romans verse was speaking about, because the transgression or the curse, whatever, fell on those even who had not sinned, like Satan.
Well, yeah, Romans 5:14, the curse falling. But I wonder if what that means is when they sinned, then the curse was applied to them too. I don't know. It doesn't say, yeah, either way. Yeah, Gene.
The NIV translates that verse as even those who did not sin by breaking a command, as did Adam. There weren't any commands till Moses. Adam sinned before the commands.
True. Well, there was one command: don't eat the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, but you're right. Yeah. Right, and in the because of the conscience and the natural law, in the context of Romans 5, that might make some sense. That what he's talking about is people who sinned prior to the Mosaic law. They're still condemned. No, prior to the flood. Right and wrong has always been right and wrong. It's not like all of a sudden the Mosaic law came along around the year 1500 BC, 1400 BC, and suddenly people said, oh darn, I can't murder anymore. I didn't know that. They knew it was wrong before. When Cain killed Abel, he knew it was wrong. So it wasn't like the Mosaic law codified a lot of stuff, but it's not like right and wrong didn't exist. Right and wrong existed the whole time. All right. I can see from the fact of the time and the fact that people are going to want to get to lunch and beat the other crowds of the restaurants that we ought to go ahead and close in prayer. Please, afterwards, as I said, if you didn't like this, feel free to tell me. You will not hurt my feelings at all. If you liked it, tell me that also, either way. And again, if you don't want to talk to us, send us an email, call the church. Don't throw a brick, but something like that. Let us know somehow what you thought of this. This will not be an every week thing, I can tell you that. But do you like it as a change of pace? Or is this something we should just put in the circular file? Just go ahead and pray.